Hello, I'm Donna Banton, and I happily serve as the instructional lead for Jefferson County Public Schools in health education. And I sincerely want to thank you for choosing to participate in this online professional development to help you understand and implement the workshop model in your skills-based health education class. I'd like to begin by giving you a little context for this professional development session. The goal of health education is to equip our learners to develop the skills, the attitudes, and have the functional knowledge needed to lead health-enhancing lives. This goal is aligned perfectly with the National Health Education Standards, which are in fact skills. These standards, which really are skills, are 1, to analyze the influences and other factors on health behaviors. The next skill is to access valid information, products, and services to enhance your health. Another skill is to use interpersonal communication to enhance your health and avoid or reduce any health risk. Then there's the decision-making skill needed to enhance your health. Goal setting to enhance your health. The skill to be able to practice health-enhancing behaviors and avoid or reduce health risk. And finally, the skill of advocacy to advocate for your personal, family, and community health. Many of us might be familiar with these national health education standards because we've had them for several years. But Kentucky just released their newly adopted in 2019 KAS, or Kentucky Academic Standards. And these standards are perfectly aligned with the National Health Education Standards. And all of the performance indicators are aligned with one of those national standards or skills. So, for all these reasons, Jefferson County's health educators have shifted toward using a skills-based approach to health instruction in order to better achieve this goal of equipping our learners to develop the skills, attitude, functional knowledge needed to lead health-enhancing lives. Workshop model is the best model for teaching and learning this skills-based approach in health education. We have recently developed this classroom instructional framework for our secondary health classes. In the left column, you see an overview of the essential components of health literacy instruction. You also see a list of instructional moves that promote health literacy, and you see notes about how skill acquisition might be demonstrated. The remainder of the text is dedicated to providing a brief overview of how the workshop model is applied in the health classroom. And we've decided the workshop model is the best model for teaching and learning in the skills-based health education classroom. But if you talk to your colleagues, you will find out that this foundational structure in the health classroom is in every other content as well right now. And that's because the workshop model is a key element in fostering student engagement, guiding students toward independence, and causing deeper learning. And for these reasons, implementing the workshop model as part of our instructional framework is the new normal, or our expectation. So the purpose of this video is to take a closer look at the workshop model in the context of a Jefferson County Health classroom. Candy Thomas, an instructional coach and educational consultant, is here to lead us through the what, the why, and the how of workshop, including a look at sample health lessons and other curriculum documents where the workshop model can be seen. This is an interactive video as part of your online professional development session. So please plan to pause when cued and complete the given tasks before moving forward with the video. Those of you who are health teachers and been around a while in Jefferson County have already had the good fortune of working with Candy Thomas on workshop model. We were ahead of the curve, and other professional learning sessions on skills-based health education. So I'm thrilled that this resident expert on health workshop is here to guide us through this online professional development on the workshop model in the teaching and learning of skills-based health education.
Good morning. As Donna mentioned, I have been honored and privileged to have the opportunity to work with Donna and several of the Jefferson County health teachers on numerous occasions, and I am privileged to be here again today to delve back into workshop with you again. Workshop is a topic about which I feel passionate. It's something I truly believe in. I remember when I first learned about workshop, I immediately saw the potential that it had in my own classroom and in my own practice. I saw that it could help me not only as a teacher think about planning my lessons and my classroom time in a very structured way, but more importantly, I saw the potential for what it could do for students. The fact that it could increase engagement and deepen their learning. And so it took some intentionality at first. I had to really consciously think about planning using that structure, but it soon became second nature to me, and I definitely saw the power, so I've used it ever since. And to those of you to whom workshop is new, I am confident that you are going to find it just as valuable and powerful as I did. So thank you for letting me be with you today and to help lead you through this exploration of the workshop model. Before we begin, just like all educators do, we're going to take a few minutes to think about the background knowledge that you already bring to this topic. One of the logistical elements that you're going to notice, obviously, is that because this is an interactive video, as Donna mentioned, we're going to have a lot of pauses so that you can have that opportunity to process the information or to complete a task in order to move forward with the learning. So an ongoing cue that you'll notice will be the pause symbol that will appear on a screen, and then of course there'll be a direction about what particular activity or question you might need to address within your response materials. You do have a response packet that includes not only tasks and prompts, but also a few texts that we'll be addressing as we move through. So our first opportunity to move into that response packet occurs right now. If you will go to question number 1, you'll see that it asks you a few different prompts that will help you to think about what you already know or what background knowledge you do bring already to this topic of workshop model. So please pause and complete that now. Thank you. Another logistical note, I suspect many of you are completing this professional learning alone, but if you happen to be fortunate enough to have a colleague or colleagues who are participating in this learning with you, I hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity to share some of your thinking with each other. So each time that we do stop and we respond to a question, before moving on, if you would, just briefly share with each other your thinking so that you get the benefit of your colleagues' perspective before we continue with the tape. So as you see on the screen, our learning targets for today's session are listed for you. At the end of this session, our hope is that you will be able to explain the rationale behind Workshop and why it's such a powerful instructional approach. And then a second learning target would be the ability to describe the components of Workshop and the respective purposes for each. And then finally, the hope is that you will leave this session with a very clear understanding of how the Workshop model is used to support the implementation of the Jefferson County Secondary Health Curriculum. The agenda then corresponds directly with those learning targets, of course. So we will begin by examining the rationale behind Workshop before moving into clarifying exactly what Workshop is and taking a closer look at each of the components and its key elements. And then finally, we will explore how Workshop looks within the context of the health classroom, including taking a closer look at some sample health lessons to put it in context. So as Donna mentioned, we're going to use the what, why, how format to kind of organize this session today. As teachers, we're really familiar with the what and how. That's something that we naturally do in the classroom all the time. We're very explicit with our children about what it is we want them to learn, the concepts, the skills, the knowledge that we want them to have. And we also tend to be really, really explicit about the how we want them to complete this activity or how we want them to proceed. But one of the pieces that sometimes gets away from us is delving into the why with our students. But when we stop and think about it, when we address the why, a lot of times that's where we hook them or we engage them because we're answering that wondering that's happening in their mind of why should I care or how is this going to help me in life? The same concept applies to adult learners, except that adult learners generally tend to care even more about the why. I'm sure as you begin this video session, it's going through your head. How is this going to impact my instruction? Why should I care? Why should I want to implement this into my practice? And so that's where we're going to begin. Rather than start with the what, we're going to start with the why, or the rationale behind Workshop, so that hopefully you'll be able to understand why this is such an important tool that you can use in your classroom. But as we're going to talk about, one of the whys behind Workshop is that it's engaging in that it really pushes the students to be minds-on and oftentimes hands-on. It helps them to engage and interact with the content, and it moves away from that passive role that sometimes the learners tend to play in the classroom. And so, with that in mind, rather than my telling you a lot of the rationale behind Workshop, I'm going to give you the opportunity to read some quotes and to think about the whys that you can infer from reading that material. So again, if you'll move into your response packet, you're going to see that there is a section of quotes. It has a title. I think it's called Why Quotes. And as you see on the screen, there's a slide that directs you to please read those why quotes and then answer question number 2 in your packet, which asks you to list 4 to 5 reasons that are offered that support the use of the Workshop model in the classroom. Please pause the video and do that now. You saw when you read those quotes, Workshop model is not something that is found only in the English language arts classroom, as many people mistakenly believe. Probably the reason behind that is I believe that is where it started. But when you read those quotes, you noticed that there were experts from many different fields who were speaking about the benefits of Workshop there, whether math or a different area. One of the reasons why Workshop is so important across the content areas is because it is a foundational structure that allows so many other important instructional moves to occur. And so as you see on the screen, we're listing just a few, but one of those is differentiation. We're going to delve more deeply into some of these ideas later in the video, but just to briefly name them, Workshop offers a place for differentiation to occur. It offers a time within that class period where it can naturally happen. And so that's one other why behind workshop. As we've mentioned several times, a different why or rationale for the use of workshop would be the fact that it does promote increased student engagement. I don't think we can say that enough because we all understand the power of that in causing deeper learning for students. Yet another why behind workshop would be the fact that it works hand in hand with gradual release of responsibility. This may be a model that you're very familiar with. Sometimes we shorten it, we call it GRR, but if it's new to you, just a brief explanation would be that the gradual release of responsibility is that model that helps us move students strategically from novice, not understanding very much about a concept or a skill, and then through these specific steps we follow, we gradually move them towards independence. Workshop allows that to happen, and we are again going to revisit that idea a little bit later in the video in more detail. But finally, another rationale or reason behind the use of workshop is that it is research-based and it has proven to be a powerful tool that impacts student learning. I know many of you are very familiar with the well-known professional text, Best Practice, Today's Standards for Teaching and Learning in America's Schools. Well, in that text, based on research, the authors identified 7 best practice strategies that have been proven to have the greatest impact on student learning. And if you look at that book, you will find that classroom workshop is one of the 7 strategies named in that text. So now that we've had a chance to read some of those quotes and also talk about some other reasons why workshop is such a powerful tool, we're going to pause here and give you an opportunity to just process and reflect for a moment on this one short segment of our video. Back again, in your packet, you see question 3 gives you an opportunity to think about how your thinking has already changed. So if you would, pause and respond to question 3, which asks you to revisit a question you've already answered. Based on these quotes and the conversation that we've just had, why do you now believe that JCPS has set an expectation for the use of workshop in every classroom? Please go ahead and address that question now. So we're ready to move now into the next segment, which is the what of workshop. But before we do that, again, as educators, we know the power of the self-assessment tool. And so in your packet, you have one such tool. It's labeled Task 4, Agree or Disagree, the Workshop Anticipation Guide. And so if you would pause again the video and complete that brief anticipation guide before moving on, then that will help you to kind of think about your very specific understanding of the components of workshop. So you can set that anticipation guide aside for right now. We will revisit that later. We'll use it as a tool to think about how our understanding has grown after we move through this segment. So it'll offer us an opportunity for reflection later. But for the time being, we'll go ahead and move on into our conversation. Now, as we said before, rather than sit passively and listen to me talk, we want to use some of these same strategies that we're talking about. So in your packet, there is an article by Chris Giovanni. It's called Minimize Lecture, Maximize Learning, the Workshop Model. It was originally published in Education World several years ago, but it was taken actually from her book, Chris Giovanni's book, called So What Do They Really Know?, which is focused on assessment. This article is very brief, very concise, but it offers an overview of what the workshop model is and its main 4 stages or components. And so what we're going to ask you to do is, again, pause the video and complete task 4 that you see written here on the slide. The specific task we're asking you to complete is just simply to read and annotate the article with 2 questions in mind. Number one, what is workshop? And number two, what are the key components of the workshop model? So please pause now to do so. Before we move on into our discussion of those components of workshop and try to answer that question, what is workshop? Just a side note. When you look at the title used for this article, it points us back to one of those whys that we've already discussed. Looking at the title, Minimize Lecture, Maximize Learning, it reminds us of that rationale, that reason we named just a few minutes ago. Workshop can significantly help reduce the amount of time that students sit passively listening to lecture and increase the amount of time that they spend engaging in the content, thus increasing and deepening their learning. To go back to those questions, as you were reading the article, the first question that you had in mind was, what is workshop? Based on that text, you probably pulled out a few key ideas that Tovani brought to the forefront of our mind. One of those ideas was workshop is a way to organize your lesson or your classroom. It's a set structure that teachers can use to ensure that students get to strategically engage in some moves that are proven to impact their learning. To name some of those, it ensures that they receive clear instruction, that they are allowed time to practice and engage in the learning that's the goal for that day. It offers that opportunity for timely, immediate feedback, and it offers them an opportunity to reflect. Because it is a set structure, it's something that to us is a routine. That word is used a lot. Workshop is often seen as a routine. That routine can be supportive to us as teachers because when we go to plan lessons, it gives us a way to think. It offers us a scaffold of how to plan, how to organize. But it's even more important to students. Having that routine, knowing how their class is going to be organized, can be very supportive to students. It gives them predictability, but it also offers them the promise. They know when they walk into that classroom that they can expect. They're probably going to have time when they're going to get to try to engage in learning with peers. They know that it's going to be minds-on, there'll be some hands-on, and oftentimes that alone can increase their level of excitement about that class when they know that they're going to have those opportunities versus thinking, maybe I'm going to be sitting here passively listening for an entire period. Maddie Shepard, who is someone you recognize, she works for JCPS, but she's also affiliated with the Buck Institute for Education, defines workshop in this way. You'll see this on the screen. The workshop model, first developed by Lucy Calkins at Teachers College, Columbia, is a way to organize your lessons and class time that is student-centered. It maximizes student work and practice time, focusing on practice, growth, and reflection, while minimizing the amount of time the teacher spends in front of the classroom. The workshop model's focus is on the student, allowing time for students to get messy with learning, reflect on their learning, and pursue self-driven inquiry. So please take a minute now to process your understanding of the workshop model by answering question 6 in your response packet. If the workshop is a set structure that educators use to organize their lessons and their class time, then what is that structure? Let's look now at that second question that you had in mind as you were reading that article by Chris Tovani. So as you noticed, there are 4 basic parts of the workshop model. They're appearing now on the screen as I briefly overview them. First is the opening, second, the mini lesson, third, the work time, and lastly, there's the debrief. which is oftentimes referred to as sharing or reflection. In fact, when you look at your documents that you find in your health curriculum, and you see all those lessons that have been written for you that are already in workshop structure, you're going to notice that that last stage is referred to as sharing reflection. They're the same thing, just a different name. We're going to move now through each of those different stages of workshop, or parts of workshop, if you want to use that terminology, one by one, talking about the key elements of each. And we're going to start with the opening. Most teachers have some type of a routine that they use to start their classroom. Many times it might be a warm-up that begins every classroom, it might be a sponge activity, or some other routine. The opening stage of workshop aligns beautifully with that routine that teachers already have in place. But the opening has a set purpose. There are certain specific things that need to happen in the opening of workshop. Namely, it's very important during the opening that we prepare the students for the learning that's going to occur that day in the lesson. So that opening might be focused on activating the students' background knowledge, or if they don't have background knowledge already about a particular topic or subject or skill, then maybe the opening is designed to build a little background knowledge. Or it might be that the opening hooks the student's attention relative to the topic or the subject or the skill that they are looking at that day. Or possibly it's designed to create an interest or a need to know, to establish some type of relevance for the students. On the screen you see a chart that briefly overviews the opening and how it might look from the teacher's perspective. Here are some things the teacher would think about. Basically what I've just overviewed with you, and it also points out what the student would be doing during the opening, which is basically adhering to the routines and procedures that the teacher has in place to start the class and immediately engaging in that thinking. That student is going to be minds on already, again, responding to the warm-up and thinking about the subject, the topic, or the skill that is in front of them. To make this more concrete, let's think about it in the context of a health lesson. Let's suppose that I'm a health teacher and my lesson is focused on refusal of e-cigarettes or vape pens, which would tie directly to the skill of using interpersonal communications. So perhaps then my opening might be something like putting data in front of the students, showing them how widespread the use of vape pens and e-cigarettes are by teens in our surrounding county. And by doing so then, I might create relevance for them, showing them that this is an issue that's going on around them. It might also hook them, make them interested in the topic, but it gets them focused on what they are going to be learning that day. Perhaps instead of using data, I might have a journal entry. The students walk in the room and they're asked to respond in their health journal to a question that says, based on your own personal experience and knowledge, how widespread do you think the use of vape pens and e-cigarettes by teens is, and why do you think your parents and professionals in the health field are so concerned about this issue? Again, that particular opening move hopefully would establish relevance for the students and make them think about their background knowledge and their own personal experiences with the issue, and then get them interested in moving on with the lesson. A note about the time frame. Generally, we want to keep the opening short. Sometimes it can get away from us, but a goal to have in mind is to keep the opening around 10 minutes if possible, because we obviously have so many other stages we want to move our students through during that class time. So we're going to pause now and we're going to move to question 7 in your response packet, but just a quick note. Because we have 4 different stages of workshop that we're going to be moving through, we want to pause at the end of each stage to have that brief time to process and reflect. And so this will be a bit of a pattern of stopping and moving back to question 7 every time we finish a segment. So when you look at question 7, you see all 4 stages are listed there. You're only going to be addressing the opening part at this time. So take just a couple of minutes and capture some of those important ideas about the opening stage of workshop that you want to remember because you know you're going to be applying that to your own practice. Please go ahead and do so now. The mini lesson is the stage of workshop where the teacher sets the students up to do the work. Obviously, we'll be moving into the work time next, but in short, if the work time is where the students have to engage in the learning, really delve into the skill or the concept that's the focus of that day's lesson, then this mini lesson is that opportunity for the teacher to set that up and to make sure the students are ready to engage in that learning. And so there are two important things that have to occur during the mini lesson stage. The first thing is clarity. This is the teacher's opportunity to make sure that there is clarity about the learning that is supposed to happen in this lesson. So part of that clarity would be making sure that the goals of the lesson are clear. The purpose of the lesson, the learning targets need to be shared with the students. They need to understand what it is they're supposed to know and be able to do at the end of that lesson. And of course, for relevance sake, hopefully they'll also know why they should care, how this somehow applies to their life or is something worth learning. Something to bear in mind, which I'm sure we know, but sometimes you know how things get away from us. When we talk about the purpose of the lesson, we're not just talking about a topic. We're really thinking about, again, what is it we really want the students to know or be able to do by the end. The second important piece that has to occur during the mini lesson is that the teacher must prepare the students to engage in the learning that's coming up. And so the mini lesson might include some direct instruction from the teacher. It might include the teacher modeling the skill, or perhaps the modeling comes from another student who happens to be proficient with the skill. It might be a demonstration. It might be a think aloud, thinking through the process or the skill or the concept. It might be guided practice, where after the modeling, now the teacher is guiding the class to practice it, but still very supported. All of those are different types of things that could happen during this mini lesson stage. For those of you familiar with gradual release of responsibility, the mini lesson stage aligns directly with those first two parts of gradual release, the I do stage, where students are watching someone else do it so they can see it and learn. And it also corresponds to the we do it together stage, that guided practice where, again, the students are supported as they practice what they have just learned. One last note about the mini lesson, while it often proves to be a very, very powerful time, it can also be challenging for teachers in terms of pacing. A noticing is that the mini lesson is really meant to be a short chunk of the class period. We usually shoot for like 15 minutes of a 60-minute period or less. There are times when a mini lesson might only be 5 or 10 minutes. And every now and then it runs a little longer. But oftentimes we'll find that teachers new to workshop will have a pattern of having really long mini lessons, and it's just one of those pacing challenges. So if that occurs, a tip would be to start thinking about chunking your instruction. Instead of going for 40 minutes where the students are passively listening, think about breaking that instruction up so that maybe there's a first chunk of instruction and then the students get to engage in thinking and trying out that strategy, some work time, and then follow back up with more instruction and then more work time. Because as Tovani pointed out to us in her article, unfortunately, when our mini lessons go really long, we run the risk that a number of our students are going to lose focus, or they're just not going to be able to absorb all that information that we're sharing. Again, you see on the screen a brief overview of that information that I've just shared with you. And we're going to pause yet again to return to question 7 so that we can capture our takeaways about this mini lesson stage of workshop time. The third stage of the workshop model is work time. To refer back to that article by Chris Tovani, remember she called it the most important part of the workshop and therefore must be the longest part of the period. The graphic that you now see on the screen is taken from Samantha Bennett's book entitled That Workshop Book. It provides a nice visual representation of the portion of the class period that should be dedicated to student work or to the engagement in the learning versus the portion allocated to all the other parts of the workshop structure. So if you look at that graphic, you notice that the work time is the biggest piece of that pie. It is definitely meant to be ideally about half your class period. Again, that can be a challenge, but that is something that we want to shoot for because this is, as Tovani said, the most powerful time of the lesson to our students' learning. It's their opportunity to be minds-on, often hands-on with the learning. It's where they get to make sense of the concept or the skill. They get to read, write, talk. And because we are teaching health through that skills-based approach, work time is essential because it's the stage where the students have that opportunity to actually practice the skill and receive feedback from that teacher in order to continue to grow and become more independent with the skill. Again, to refer back to gradual release of responsibility, it's in the work time where the students have the chance to do the you do together stage, where they get to try things out with their peers. And it's also where we try to get them to independence, the you do it alone stage. Work time is also very important because there are 3 powerful instructional moves that have the ability to occur during this stage of the workshop. They are differentiation, conferring, and catch and release. We're going to briefly talk about each one. So differentiation can occur in multiple ways during work time because we often, again, have those students working, whether in pairs or groups or by themselves. That's an opportunity for the teacher to differentiate. It might be that there's strategic grouping based on ability. It might be that students are reading different texts because their reading ability are at different places. Or perhaps there might be something such as a situation where we have a group of students who are over in the corner receiving extra instruction from the teacher because they're struggling with that concept or skill, while everyone else in the room is moving forward. So there are multiple different ways that we could use differentiation during the work time of workshop. Conferring is the second powerful move that occurs during work time. And this is, conferring can just not be overstated. Conferring is not the same as circulating or checking in with students. Just to kind of distinguish the difference, it's much more instructional and individualized and therefore tends to be much more impactful to student learning. Conferring generally involves posing questions to students to see where they are, to check their progress, their understanding, and then using that to formatively assess where they are with the learning so that then the teacher can move them forward. These little instructional nudges that occur during conferring can be very powerful because this is where students can receive that specific, timely feedback regarding their skill demonstration or their knowledge and therefore move forward and grow. And finally, a third instructional technique that can be used during work time is the catch and release. Now, you don't always need to use a catch and release, but it's a technique that is very handy to use in 2 different situations or scenarios generally. Sometimes a catch and release can be pre-planned. It might be that the teacher sends the students to work time anticipating that he or she is going to need to catch them, stop them in their work time to add another layer of instruction or to address a certain misconception or struggle that the teacher predicts is going to happen. So after the brief catch, then they are released to continue working. Other times, the catch and release occurs when the teacher starts walking around the room and notices there's a pattern of student struggle or student misunderstanding, lack of clarity. And so when that happens, rather than having a conference with this group and then the same conference with the next group and on and on and on, the teacher can simply catch the class, clarify the misconception or clear up the confusion, and then again release them to go back to work time. So those three instructional strategies, differentiation, conferring, and catch and release, are the three powerful tools that are very often used during work time of workshop. So we can see now why Chris Tovani called work time the most important stage of the workshop model. Before we move on to that final stage, again, let's return to question 7 and capture those important elements that we want to make sure that we remember to take to our own practice when we're implementing the work time of workshop. Final stage of workshop is referred to by Chris Tovani as the debrief, but as we mentioned earlier, in your curriculum documents, you're going to often see it called the sharing or reflection time. Again, it means the same thing. So the reflection or debrief stage of workshop is very powerful. We want to make sure that we get that in because many important things can happen during this stage. It's the opportunity for the teacher to formatively assess the student's progress towards those learning goals, to look back at those learning targets and to see where the students fell. Did they achieve them? If not, what are the next steps the next day? It's the opportunity to catch misconceptions and address them. It's the opportunity for students to share their thinking and their understanding and to hear others' perspectives so that they can kind of solidify and process their learning. So there are many important things that happen during that debrief or sharing stage. Sometimes teachers mistakenly believe that students have to respond in writing, some type of exit slip or some type of written reflection in order to achieve this debrief or reflection stage of workshop. That's not necessarily the case. I know maybe some people might be reluctant thinking that it involves too much time. But reflection can occur even if there are only 5 minutes left in class. It can happen if there are 2 minutes left in class. Sometimes just a brief turn and talk, how has our thinking changed about this concept, or what have I learned about the skill of blah, blah, blah in today's lesson. Turn and talk with a partner, and then I'm going to call on 3 people randomly before we leave class. Something as simple as that can cause the students to kind of go back and process their learning and help the teacher also formatively assess where they are. So please return now to that question 7 final note where it says reflection, debrief, and add your takeaways about this last stage of workshop. An analogy that's often helpful to people when they're first learning about workshop is to put it in the context of sports. If we think about workshop following that comparison, that analogy, then the mini lesson might equate to the drills that we teach our athletes, or possibly those times when the coach is explaining new plays, drawing on the board, walking through those plays with the athletes, and then guided practice, directing them to run those plays while giving feedback. Those types of things would all fall into the mini lesson analogy of work time. The work time itself would be those times when the athlete actually gets to play the game. They're in there. They're taking all of their learning and they have to apply it. So it is hands-on, minds-on, and there's some struggle, but that's where the real learning occurs. The coach is over on the sidelines conferring, There might be instruction, timely feedback yelled across the field. Perhaps it's a huddle where there's that feedback offered in this smaller context, this group context, but that's the conferring. There's differentiation. Different athletes are given different instruction, different feedback. Those pieces all happen. Then finally, reflection. For that athlete, sometimes it might happen in the car on the ride home as they're analyzing the game with parents or friends. But oftentimes in a more structured setting, it might be analyzing the tape with the coach and the team, or just talking about, here's what we did well in this game, here's what we've got to work on next. So that would be the reflection part. So when we think about that sports analogy, it really drives home that point that we've said several times now, the importance of the work time. We can run drills all day long, we can talk about plays all day long, but if those kids, those athletes don't ever get to play the game, then they don't really truly get the learning. They don't truly get the independence that we want them to achieve. And honestly, it's just not as fun. And so it reminds us why the workshop structure is so important in the classroom as well. So we've spent quite a bit of time on the what of workshop, and this is, it makes sense because this is where the majority of this content lies, is right here. What is workshop? But in defining the structure of workshop, we have covered a great deal of information. And so as a final reflective question, I previewed this, kind of foreshadowed it earlier, but as a final reflection, I'm going to ask you to return to that anticipation guide that you completed a while ago before we started this segment. And I'm going to have you please review all your answers, see which answers you would change now from agree to disagree or vice versa, and then also respond to the final reflection question that you see. There's a space for it at the bottom of that page. And in that space, just answer, please, 2 ways that your thinking or understanding about workshop has changed based on this information that we've discussed together or the readings that you've done. Before we move on to the next segment of our video, let's take a few minutes to just briefly talk through those answers. When we look at the first statement, conferring is a critical part of work time, that would be an agree. Conferring is hugely important, as I'm sure you appreciate. The second statement, the mini lesson stage of workshop should take the longest amount of time. We know that's not true because it's the work time that should be dedicated the biggest chunk of time in our lesson. Number 3, direct instruction has no place in workshop. That's not true. Direct instruction can still occur. It would happen during the mini lesson stage, but again, it would be brief. It would be concise because we want those kids' minds on, hands on. We don't want them passively listening to us for long chunks of time. Number 4, 2 important reasons to debrief or reflect would be, 1, allows teacher to formatively assess whether or not students got it, and number 2, provides the opportunity to point back to the learning targets. That is absolutely true. That's an agree. Number 5, activating background knowledge or providing a hook to engage the students in the concept, topic, skill, whatever it is that happens to be the focus of our lesson, would occur during the opening stage of workshop. That is true, so that's agree. Number 6, 1 rationale for using workshop is that it allows students to play the game or to actually do the kind of work or thinking done by people in that field. That is absolutely true as well. That's an agree. We want our students thinking and applying our skills because we want them to be able to then do it in real life. Number 8, establishing the purpose for the lesson and the so what usually occurs during work time. Usually occurs during the mini lesson, so that's a disagree. Occasionally it'll come out during the opening, but mini lesson is where it typically falls. Number 9, every workshop lesson should have a catch and release. Disagree. Many work times will have catch and releases, but not always. They're used as needed. And number 10, reflections must always be written. That's a disagree. Reflections can be verbal. They can be very quick too. Our final portion of the video PD today focuses on the how of workshop, and specifically how workshop looks in the context of the health classroom. Before we move into answering that question though, it's helpful to put it into the context of our health standards. We've had that recent change nationally and also at the state level, where there is a clear recognition that our students are going to be able to transfer their learning better and have a better chance of leading those health-enhancing lives that we seek if we use a skills-based approach to health education versus a topic-based approach to health education, which has been the norm for most of us. This is, of course, in alignment with the National Health Education Standards, again, with our new Kentucky health standards, and the best practice recommendations of organizations such as SHAPE. JCPS has been fortunate to have formed a collaborative relationship with two highly respected professionals in this field, as well as authors, Holly Alperin and Sarah Bennis. In fact, I believe many of you probably own a copy of this book that was very generously provided to you by Donna and some of your other leaders. It's The Essentials of Teaching Health Education, Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. This particular book was instrumental. It was used as a very powerful resource when creating the curriculum documents that you now have in your possession. Let's just go ahead and show this. Hopefully, many of you have this binder of materials. If you don't, contact somebody because you can get them. But in this binder, you have actual units for every single skill, along with lessons already written for you that are in the workshop structure. Again, based on information, resources, materials that came from Holly Alperin and Sarah Bennis. So when we look at those materials that we've already said were instrumental in kind of developing these curriculum documents and lesson plans, one of the things that you're going to notice is that within that book, Alperin and Bennis outline steps that must be part of the skill development process. Now, we're going to review those steps, but again, we want to try to make this relevant to us. So before we go through the 5 steps that these authors have outlined for us, please pause and think first about your own process with skill development. Think about a time when you were learning something for the first time, whether it was riding a bike, whether it was changing a flat tire or a baby's diaper or shooting a free throw, but pick some skill and consider the process that you had to go through to move from being a novice at that skill to being somebody who could perform it independently and pretty well. And so that will be question 8 in your packet. Just pause and outline briefly your skill development process before we move on. Let's consider riding a bike. I'm sure that's a skill that most of us possess, but we weren't born knowing how to ride a bike. We had to learn that. So if we think about the process that we went through, probably at some point we learned from watching a model. We saw others riding a bike and we took notice of the way that they did it, some of the moves that they made. Possibly we had the benefit of a think aloud or some internal monologue from these people. Maybe they shared with us some of their tips or some of the strategies they used to become proficient bike riders. So that might have been part of our process as well. Then eventually we were trying it, but we had support. Maybe the support was the use of training wheels. Maybe the support was somebody who physically held that bike up for us and kind of went alongside us as we first started to try to pedal, but we had some support. And then we tried it. We tried it by ourselves. We may have had a few falls, but we likely had, again, some feedback, some support still, a lot less, but we still had some support. Somebody calling pedal faster or try to straighten the wheel. Some kind of feedback, some kind of more more distant support, until eventually we were able to do that skill independently and proficiently all by ourselves. That process that we went through in learning that skill of riding a bike is very similar to the steps outlined by these authors. The principle is very much the same, and it also aligns very much with what we've been referring to throughout this entire morning, that gradual release of responsibility model. The idea is that learners have to have more support in the beginning. They have to see what something looks like. They have to see it in action. They have to have the benefit of modeling some of that thinking aloud of steps and process. And then they have to have some guided practice. And then as the support fades away, they try it out. They're still getting feedback, but the support is more remote until finally they can do it alone. That is basically the gradual release of responsibility model, and that's also the same type of thinking that you see when you look at the screen and you see the 5 steps that Alperin and Bennis have outlined for their 5-step skill development model, the one that they propose health teachers should use in order to teach students the skills that are also the standards in their health curriculum. So when you look at this slide, you see that the first stage, the first step, is simply introducing the students to the skill. That includes defining the skill, making it relevant to the students, why should we care, and also clarifying the goals. What is the goal for learning this skill? What are you going to do with it? And then the second step, again, it's on the screen there, would be presentation of the skill cues. We want the students to understand the specific discrete steps or cues they would have to follow in order to effectively perform that skill. The third step is modeling. It is very hard to perform a skill if I don't know what it's supposed to look like. If I can't see it in action, it's difficult. It'll be difficult for me to ever do it. So modeling encompasses that aspect, but it also often involves the guided practice where the teacher is still very involved walking students through it, but a tiny bit more release of the responsibility to them, a little less support. The fourth step is when the students get to practice the skill using real life scenarios. It is very important. Remember, the ultimate goal is transfer. We want the students to own the skill, own the learning, and be able to apply it to their own lives in many different contexts and situations. And so as we have them practice the skill, it's important for us to try to give them as many real life situations as possible and to make sure that those situations cross the different health domains so that they don't think of refusal as only something I do with drugs. They understand that refusal could go with peer pressure, refusal could go with alcohol, it could go with so many other things. And so we want to strategically try to promote that transfer by giving them situations that cross different topics, different health domains. And then finally, the 5th stage of the 5-step skill development that Alperin and Bennis outlined for us would be feedback and reinforcement. The students need feedback. They need to hear what they did well, how they need to continue to grow so that they own the skill. And they also need reinforcement to think about this skill outside the classroom. They need to be pushed to think about it in the context of their own lives and how they could then take it and do something else with it. These steps have been incorporated into the JCPS health curriculum. So if you follow the lessons that have already been written for you for a particular skill, such as setting and achieving goals or analyzing influences, if a teacher moves through those lessons in order, then you will also be strategically moving your students through those 5 steps for skill development and gradually releasing them to higher level of independence with whichever skill it is that you're addressing at that time. So you may be happy to learn that you have a huge number of lessons already written for you. In fact, I think we alluded to that earlier. If you were not aware, you not only have those lessons that were written in conjunction with the skills, those skill units that are in those documents, you have some other lessons that were written in the workshop format as well. For example, there are a set of lessons that were created in partnership with the Center for Women and Families. Those lessons have the skills embedded directly in there, and all are written in the workshop format. And you also have a few lessons related to the topic of e-cigarettes and vape pens. So again, the skills are there, as well as the lessons written in the workshop format. So let's take a look at a few of these sample lessons in order to make this a bit more concrete. On the screen, you see lesson 1 from the decision-making unit. So in your curriculum documents, this is decision-making lesson 1. And when you look at the screen and you just kind of skim through the lesson, you'll notice down the left-hand side that you see those stages of workshop outlined for you. You see it clearly labeled. Here's the opening stage and what happens in that stage, the mini lesson stage, work time, and then again that sharing reflection, which is the debrief. You may notice that you also see approximate length of time that should be dedicated to each of those stages. So again, we try to bear in mind that the work time should always be the longest stage. Sometimes it's a little longer or a little shorter than others, but a goal is to always have the work time be the longest stage. And again, you see specifically how the skill plays out and some of those elements of gradual release that we've talked about. So you have the opportunity now to look at a second sample lesson and to process for yourself how you see the workshop structure, format, playing out within that lesson. In your packet, it's labeled as Task 9. You have the next lesson that follows this one, Decision Making Lesson 2, and what you're asked to do is read it all of it, word for word, thinking the whole time about workshop and how you see workshop and its elements within that lesson. And then there is a question that follows that decision-making lesson 2 that asks you to synthesize and reflect, kind of pull all these pieces together. And it asks you specifically to think about how you see workshop supporting health instruction and education in your classroom. How are you going to use this to support student learning in your own health classroom? So again, please pause the video and complete Task 9.
I want to thank Candy for always being such a great resource for Jefferson County and for her amazing expertise about workshop that she shared with us today. So now I want to thank each of you for participating to this point, but I want to invite or beg you to do the next part of NEPD, which is to implement. So the goal of any professional learning session is not to just get your hours and cross it off your to-do list and one and done so that you have enough hours to be off on any flex day. The purpose of any professional learning is that it make it to the desk of our students. So professional learning, the why of professional learning is about continuous improvement in the learning and the teaching, both in a health education, skills-based class. So even the presenter shared that that's a process, and we really understand that it doesn't happen overnight. Candy talked about it took a lot of patience and planning and persistence for this skill of teaching in a workshop method to become second nature to her. And so because I know how important this is to our students, I want to promise you that we recognize it's a process and we want to commit to supporting you on that journey. So one way is through resources that were referenced throughout the PD. So if you don't already have these texts or these binders of lessons, we absolutely will get them to you if you let us know, so that you are able to fully implement. We also have a lot of online professional learning sessions that the author of these texts, Sarah Bennis, has prepared in the same way this PD was done, and I really hope you'll take advantage and participate in those. Also, there's a professional learning community of health educators who are also attempting to implement skills-based health education, and think how supportive it could be to improve your continuous learning and support all of your colleagues in that process. So, for us to know what you need, your last task, your task number 10, the final task, is to, besides evaluating this class, which you'll need to do on PD Central so that you get credit for this learning, is task 10 is going to be just a brief statement of your intention to implement, and then what resources and support the district can provide to you to make that implementation possible. So thanks again, and I'm looking forward to walking with you on this exciting journey that will benefit the health of our students.